Today is March 3rd, 2012. We're at the Grand Island Veterans Home in Grand Island, Nebraska. We're talking to Charles J. Caito. Charles was born in Omaha, Nebraska on June 13th, 1923. He served in the Army in the European theater during World War II. He was with Patton's Third Army from Omaha Beach to Bastogne. He was the chief of communications and laid wires to Patton's headquarters. And again, my name is Lawrence Molchick. I work here at the Grand Island Veterans Home, and I'll be the interviewer today.
Okay.
And if we could just start out, talk about your childhood. Tell us a little bit about your growing up years in the family.
Okay. I was born in Omaha in 1923. My mother was named Josephine, my dad was named Charlie, and I had three sisters, a brother, and myself. I was the youngest. I went to grade school in the Catholic grade school, graduated from 8th grade. We moved to Lincoln for 3 years. I came back to Omaha and finished at Tech High School in Omaha, and I ended up in a Scott tent and awning, driving a panel truck, delivering tanks and things to Fort Crook, which is Omaha Beach. I can't think. Offutt Air Force. It was Omaha Beach, and that's where I got drafted in Fort Crook. I got drafted and was sent for 3 weeks to March 26th, and they put us on a troop train, and we ended up in California, near Riverside, California, at Camp Hawn. That's where we got our basic training, and were there about 6 months, and we moved out into the desert close to the Colorado River. And that's where we spent the rest of our time till they put us on a troop train. And he ended up in Camp Shank, New York. And we got our shots and everything for overseas. We didn't know where we were going or anything. And they put us on a ship called the Queen Elizabeth. And because we were anti-aircraft, they didn't have any money to run their guns. So we ended up living with the crew, 546 did, and we ate with them. And it took us 3 days from New York to Scotland. They took us off the plane, the ship, and put us on trucks, and we ended up in England then. I don't remember the town, but they put us in a building that was never finished. They didn't have electricity and water. We called it Pneumonia Hall. Anyway, it had double beds. They did have electricity and water in it. Then we left and got on a ship. I don't remember the name of it. I'm a little ahead of my time. We guarded an airfield then. Then they took us and put it on a ship, and we went across the English Channel. That was it, Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944. And it was murder. There was American soldiers all over the English Channel. The Omaha Beach had high cliffs, and there was 2 pillboxes on the top, and they were firing down. And every time one of the shore ships would go there with the infantry, they would fire it and blow it up. And finally, the planes came over, and they started strafing and bombing, and they got rid of the field boxes. And then the engineers came, started bombing the fields, and made a field to the top. And we were in hedgerows country. And each of the French farmers had about 100 feet. It was a regular basic field, I guess they called it. Hedgerow to hedgerow to hedgerow. That was three weeks of that. Finally got in the open, and Pat got his tanks, and we followed. He had 1 tank he led, and 2 on each side of him, and start making advancements. It took us a whole year from Omaha Beach to Bastogne.
We could go back to the landing at Omaha Beach that day. Can you tell me a little bit about what was going through your head? How did you feel when you saw what kind of fortifications they had and what you were
scared to death?
Was that the first time that you had encountered any combat situation?
Otherwise, well, we had maneuvers, but I mean, it didn't make any difference. Pardon?
Do you remember any particular close calls that you had that day?
No, we were on ship yet because we had trucks and big guns, field artillery behind us. Once the infantry got enough room for us to land, then we landed. It was about 5 days later.
You were in the communications
Hmm.
unit there.
We had 4
Tell us the
guns and
story
a
about-
battery.
Yeah, how did you get into that communications field? How did you get chosen for that?
That's a funny story, Larry. They had 546. We were an A battery, and there's about 100 of us all together. So 4 guns in communication headquarters and the chow and also the motor pool. Oh, they had a race, and Chuck Tansey and myself was in the same hut together. That was in Camp Pontiac. We ended up the last 2 in the race, and Tansey was ahead of me, and I was pretty fast with my feet, and I passed and won. I ended up in gun position 1, and I saw somebody down below us. We were taught the guns, the 40 millimeter, and I said to Chuck, I said, that guy down there is trying to teach those people how to climb a telephone pole. I said, I'm going down and teach them how to time it. He said, what do you know about it? I said, I took electricity in high school, and they had a telephone pole in there, and that was one of my first lessons. So I went down and showed it, and I ended up in communication. And I was there for the rest of my life, Army life.
Can you tell me about some particular times when the communications came through that you thought were of particular important turning points in the war?
Well, without us, the gun positions wouldn't know when to move and when not to move. We had to lay wire from Patton's headquarters to ours, and then from each gun position. And I was in charge of the people behind me. We had one person, a sergeant, that drove the truck, and we had a weapons carrier with the wheels with the wire behind it. So I had to climb a telephone pole, and I'd bring the wire across the road, and sometimes we'd throw it through through the underneath. Sometimes we'd have to crawl under there to do it.
Were there cases where the wire that you laid got sabotaged or
Oh, yes.
or destroyed and you had to relay it?
Yeah, every hour we'd call the gun positions to find out if we couldn't locate them. We'd go out and try to find it.
When you were laying this wire, were you ever under fire during the
Quite a few
process?
times. I got sick one time near Nancy, France. I got arthritis in my leg. They put me in the field hospital, which they call MASH now. And I was there about 3 weeks, and when I got back, I went to go back to A Battery, and I couldn't go back. Somebody took my place. So I ended up driving a Jeep for the Catholic chaplain for about 3 weeks a month. And then the guy that took my place, I don't know, the sergeant was a very good friend of mine, John Riggs, and his brother was a drunk. And he ended up taking my place, and he got in a Jeep, him and another one, and hit a tree head on, and he was killed instantly. So I was sent back to A Battery then.
So you worked
Then while I was driving the chaplain, we were driving the D Battery, D headquarters rather, and 3 Germans jumped out in front of us, start firing at us. I slammed the brakes on and we jumped out. We got behind the Jeep, and I gave them my pistol, and I had a Tommy gun at that time. And they quit firing. I figured they were out of ammunition. I reached up and started firing my Tommy gun, got 2 of them. The other one got away. That was the closest I really came. It was a hell of a life. But I came through it. Came home, went to school for upholstery. Learned that, and I was there for 23 years and the foreman of it. That's where I met my wife. She was a secretary.
before you come home here, let's talk about more towards the end of the war. What do you remember about things as the war began to wind down, as you got closer and closer to Berlin and Germany? Do you have any particular recollections of things near the end of the war?
We were 100 miles from Bastogne, and it was in December, the 1st of December, into January, the 1st of December. Snow and ice, it was heck. We got to Bastogne, and the Third Army surrounded Bastogne. Anti-aircraft, tanks, half-tracks, field artillery. And the planes couldn't come because it was snowing and everything. It was closed up. And that was the end of the war then. They would advance and Patton would advance. They finally ran out of ammunition. Of course, Hitler committed suicide.
And once the armistice was signed, or they surrendered, you served over there for a while longer. What were your duties after the hostilities themselves?
Well, they ran out of ammunition, came up with their hands up. No guns or anything else. They got rid of everything, gave themselves up.
So what did your job become after the actual fighting was over with?
We went back to camp then. And I was there about 3 months, and they started out, people the old in the 30s was discharged, and on down, married people with children on down. Of course, us guys, there was about 40 of us left. Didn't have enough points, so I ended up more or less like a field artillery. Not field artillery, but I mean, just taking care of in the camp. They had much to do. Then they put us on a ship and brought us back to Omaha, back to the United States, and he ended up New Year's Eve there, Newport News, Virginia.
Tell me about your homecoming. Who was there?
Oh boy, it was something. A friend of mine, Chuck Green, lived in Omaha, and we got our discharge. They gave us 2 dress uniforms, took the rest of our clothes away, and new boots and everything, and an overcoat, which I hated. And we went to get on a bus, and some guy came up and he says, "Where you heading?" We said, "Omaha." He says, "I'll take you there for $10 a head." I said, "Okay." So we did, and he wanted 2 more guys. So he took us. He said, "Where do you want to leave off at?" At the 16th and Harney near the Orpheum Theater. So he left us off there. My dad worked right across the street from him in the Central Market. He was a fruit man there. And I went in, my aunt was there, my mother's sister, and she saw me. She could ran over, gave us a hug, both of us. My dad saw me. And a bushel of apples, and he dropped them and all over the floor. And then I went home. My mother was surprised. And of course, one of my sisters was married. One was California, and the other one got married after we got back. Her husband was in the service, but he was over in the Philippines, and he came out of it too. So that was it. Till Charlene and I got married in 1950.
Yeah. Tell me a little more about how you met Charlene.
She was a secretary there, where I worked.
Where were you working there at that point?
Central Market. No, I worked at Grand's. Omaha, not Omaha Betty, but it was a bedding company and a furniture. And I went to ask about the government was giving us $52, $20 a week for 52 weeks. I took it for the first month. I couldn't take it, laying around doing nothing. So I went and asked them at the draft board. I said, "What's going on here?" I said, "Oh, why don't we send you to Omaha University to take some tests?" Well, I ended up at artistic designs. So they sent me down to Central Mattress, and that was it, Central Mattress. And I walked in, Charlene was there, and she introduced me to the boss. He hired me, and I learned upholstery. Then they had 2 teachers. And after that, they quit teaching, and they called me up one time and asked me to come work for them. so I worked for a couple nights a week for them, upholstering pianos.
Pianos?
Mm-hmm.
Like just the bench?
The old oversized ones,
Yeah.
the old size. They'd buy old pianos and have the keys fixed and have it tuned up. We'd put plastic over it, and they'd sell them to the saloons where they had dance halls and everything. I made about 12 of those, and then I ended up doing a lot of other furniture for them.
Is that where you worked most of your life then?
23 years. I got hurt at Central Mattress. We was unloading a bunch of boxcars. And we had a bunch of springs. There's maybe about 20 springs in it combined and tied up. And the last row of springs got stuck, and I reached up and grabbed it and put my feet up there and pulled it. I don't remember much after that. I ended up in the hospital with a broken disc. That was my first back operation. But I ended up there for 23 years. And I had to have another back operation up in my neck. My arm went paralyzed on me. And they took care of that, and I was home recuperating. And my nephew came over, and he says, "You're always was good with woodwork and with wires and things, and plumbing and all." He says, "Why don't you become a maintenance man," which is a third engineer in Omaha. I had to go to school for that, and I passed that. And I ended up at Blue Cross then for 16 years and retired from there as a maintenance man.
And can you tell me a little bit about family life? How many kids did you have?
Two boys,
Two boys.
David and Mark. They both live in Omaha, but I don't know too much about my young son. He had a stroke when he was about 52 years old. Mentally, I don't think he knows we're alive anymore.
And a few years ago, you came here to live at the Grand Island Veterans Home. Can you kind of tell the story about how you ended up here? You know, you could have gone to the home in Omaha, I know.
I guess they didn't have any room for us because of husband and wife.
Has this been a good move for you, do you think?
We were in assisted living for about 8 months in Gretna, Nebraska. And my daughter-in-law went to the vet's hospital and talked to him there and found out I had 3 years service, 2 years reserve, made me 5 years in the service altogether. And we ended up in Lincoln for about 3 months, and they came and got us to Grand Island then. We've been here ever since.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to make sure is recorded for your family or for history?
No, not really. Except Charlie and I did a lot of traveling around the United States.
Well, I do want to thank you today for taking the time to share your story with us. I also want to thank you for your service.